Hi, this is Stephen, and this is Astro Indicator Update, Excursions into Practical Astrology. And today is June 28th, Sunday. This is episode 45. And I need to tell you up front, I may cough a little bit in this episode. I have allergies, and they're really affecting my lungs at the moment. But let's see what we're up to today. Well, we're going to look at briefly the astrology of someone named Klaus Schwab. He was recently interviewed, and he said that there was a silver lining to the pandemic, and it was the apparent willingness of the people to change their behavior, to accept quarantines and so forth. And that struck me as quite an odd thing to say, and so I wanted to look at his astrology. We have a couple articles, picture on a very quiet sun in our solar system and how that relates to solar minimum cycles, sunspot cycles. We'll look at our market update. Okay, who is Klaus Schwab? Well, he's the founder of the World Economic Forum, and he is currently, I don't know the title, executive director. He's the head honcho. And he has been, he founded the World Economic Forum in 1971. So this fellow has been, leading that organization for 50 years. I don't think hardly any, he never does, very rarely is in the press, as far as I can tell. But the WEF is the organization that hosts the Davos gathering of world leaders, world economic or corporate heads, and so forth. This is a very influential organization worldwide. And you need to put this guy on your radar. And I was curious about his astrology. And if you've been listening to my previous recent episodes, I've made comments how I've been surprised at how often I've seen strong Neptune energies in politicians, in, Bill Gates had a very strong Neptune. But then, you also see it in people who are, genuine kind of spiritual leaders. So there's a real range of expression of a strong Neptune. Can be someone who's attuned to kind of the spiritual realm or experience, all the way to someone who's quite, let's say, deceptive or does not have a handle on reality or is very much an ideologue, someone whose beliefs they would like to, push on to others. So it's hard to say what's going on with Klaus Schwab, but he indeed is very influential at the highest levels of the, corporate world and has a hand in directing policies in countries. What's going on in his chart? Well, this fellow has a very strong Saturn. Saturn conjunct his sun. Saturn is also a leading planet. It rose at the horizon on the day that he was born. So it's even more emphasized. He can be very practical, realistic, maybe not the most secure person in the world. And so he's oriented to activities that, material activities probably, that bolster his sense of security. He was an engineer, which is a classic expression of someone with a positive expression of someone with a strong Saturn. He knows how things work, fit together, etc. In addition, again, I don't know his birth time, so ignore the ascendant here. He has Pluto squaring his Mercury, 27, 90 degrees square. Mercury square, Pluto square Mercury. So this is someone who's a researcher, who thinks deeply about things at the, kind of at the most beneficial side of that energy. He also understands psychology. He understands how propaganda and manipulation works. That's the other extreme. Um, so, he's a deep thinker, understands how to influence the public, and can do that through news and so forth. His Neptune kicks in when you notice that it is opposite his moon. On top of that, his moon is in Pisces, which is, Neptune is the ruler of Pisces. So he has a compounded Pisces, Neptune, element in his chart. And so this whole Neptune business of being, an idealist, maybe an extreme idealist, and potentially wanting to, maybe have those ideals accepted by others around him. And in this case, when you start tying these things together, you see Saturn and Pluto. This is someone, in my opinion, would be someone who's oriented to controlling Saturn energy, controlling his environment for security reasons and for power reasons with a strong Pluto. And this is a very suspicious combination of energies. And I bring this up because what's happening is also I didn't do his transit chart, but Neptune is transiting around and is now conjunct his moon and will be for a while. So this desire to convince others that his beliefs are the best beliefs and his ideals are, should be adopted by other people, I think is growing stronger and stronger in his life. And he's someone who just wrote a book, or recently, for the last 5 years, I think, called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And he's very much into artificial intelligence, in the topic of transhumanism, which people need to learn more about. But I can see why this person has gravitated. He has the skills. He's gravitated to a very powerful position, and he has an energy that wants to kind of wants to force his ideals onto other people, to be blunt. Okay, it shows up in his chart. I just wanted to give you an example of what the WEF has been doing. So this was Event 21, which was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation event, which was hosted last October 2019 and at Johns Hopkins Center for Health in partnership with the World Economic Forum. And what was this about? This was an exercise on what to do during a high-level pandemic. So this occurred 2-3 months before things started in China, 3, 4, 5 months before things started in the rest of the world. And they were discussing what policies they would implement if such a thing happened. Okay. So take it for what you can look at this in a number of different ways, but it's highly coincidental that they were preparing the world in a way for what measures they were going to take if, let's say, a pandemic did crop up. So the WEF was right in the middle of this event. Okay, let's move on. This could be too long of a broad episode. So I saw this article on Zero Hedge, and this picture kind of shocked me a little bit. I'm not going to talk about so much what the article deals with. There was this magnetic anomaly that occurred on the 23rd, and there was this picture, the sun today, a NASA photo on the 23rd, and there is zero sunspot activity in this picture. And I've never seen that before. Normally there's maybe a couple, and then sometimes there's, a whole bunch of black spots of sunspots. And when there are a lot of sunspots, the sun is very active. It's actually, generating more electromagnetic energy. The Earth is a few degrees hotter during a peak sunspot cycle. And we are going through a low sunspot period. In fact, it's an exceptionally low sunspot period. And this picture illustrates that as graphically as it can. And so this is just a little bit of an introduction to sunspot cycles, which have been studied for 200 years, going back to the early 1800s. And here's another article that kind of deals with it that I just thought was interesting. And I got this off of Martin Armstrong's website. It's armstrongeconomics.com, I believe. And this is a couple years old. And he's going through the history of the study of sunspots and correlations on Earth with certain events and activities that seem to be tied into this sunspot cycle. Now, on average, the sunspots go through a cycle, on average, generally about every 11 years. There's a high and then there's a low. And this graph actually is several years old. It goes back to 2014 or something, but the prediction was that we would go into a very steep minimum period, and we have, and that's usually characterized by actually the Earth cooling down. But if you look up this article yourself, you'll see other interesting things that come into play. And in this article, Armstrong talks about this Russian scientist who researched sunspot cycles going back 2,000 years, actually. And this guy's name was Chizhevsky, A.I. Chizhevsky. And kind of in the 1920s and 30s, he was really studying, the sunspot cycles, and then comparing those with tree rings and ice samples to see the change in climate and how that was related to sunspot activity. I've been very interested in this whole topic. I was seeing if I could find a book on my my bookshelf right next to me. But this whole topic, actually, sunspots are related to how the planets are in aspect to each other and in aspect to the sun. And I can get into this another time. It'll take too long. But that was discovered in the 1940s because they were noticing that sunspots were affecting radio broadcasts. And GE, I think it was GE, wanted to find out if they could predict when these disturbances were going to take place. And the fellow that they hired to research this thing found that you could predict sunspot activities by seeing what the angular relationships were between the planets, into the future. So anyway, I just wanted to touch this article in general. And briefly, if you go to this article, they claim that in their research, this one Russian research, he felt like that he developed what was called a mass human excitability index going back 24 centuries. And he felt like wars, very important human events, 80% of the time were taking place during a maximum in sunspot activity. Armstrong, who's writing this article, also notes that low points in sunspot activity are correlated historically with plagues and pandemics. And so, the sun is not as strong. People may not be getting as much vitamin D. I don't know. That's also part of the theory. But this is something that's going on in our world right now. It is related to our solar system, and much of my research actually is related to the solar system as well. So let's look at some markets. Here we go. This is, if you haven't been with us before, all these vertical lines are key astrological dates related to this specific market. These horizontal lines are typical support and resistance areas. Everything else are just common technical analysis, momentum indicators down here, trend lines that I've drawn in, and the key is try to tie them all together and see what's going on, see the cycles that are taking place, return of certain astrological cycles. And here, what's going on here? Well, we just broke through a pretty important support level. I've been talking about there hasn't been a lot of strong astrology in the New York Stock Exchange for a while. We have a couple dates coming up, but they are not that strong. However, the relationship between the stock exchange and the U.S. chart in general has to be taken into consideration here, because this bounce back here, right here, occurred in the U.S. astrology chart when Pluto and Jupiter were opposite Mercury in the U.S. chart, and then we got this big bounce. This is occurring again in July. And I say this because in the Dow Jones chart, there just really isn't a lot to hang your hat on. Coming up on July 3rd, which is the second and third, which is this line right here, which is kind of Thursday. I think their trading may only be half a day on Friday. We have sort of a minor astrology date. We may get a bounce. We're at a place where we should get a bounce. Support is at this 100-day moving average. 50-day moving average is right there as well. I could have put in a support level right at this red line because there is some support. And next Thursday we should get a little bounce. Looking ahead on the 9th. There is also something that could support a little bit of a bounce, but then there's this nothing out here in much of July. And this seasonally is not a good, strong, bullish time period for the Dow Jones. The other thing that could affect this market, as I said before, is the U.S. chart. And we could see the Fed come in and just start buying corporate bonds, buying ETFs, in a big way. So play the technicals here. We have conflicting indicators. If this market breaks down through this 100-day, through the 50-day, we could start testing at the next level. So you set your stops. I wouldn't buy into this market until we started breaking above some resistance areas. S&P 500, just briefly, the astrology is not drawn in here. This is the 50-day I've got, so it kind of represents, it's positioned in the same place as the Dow. It has broken through several days earlier than the Dow Jones did, this trend line. But we're not oversold, okay? We are not in a place where the computers are going to start saying, buy, buy, buy. So, there is a good chance we could go lower. Okay, let's look at gold. It is kind of getting into an interesting period. The RSI is up into the 60s. It's definitely not, back into the 80s, which I would say is overbought. We're a long ways from being overbought in the MACD. We have even just on Friday bumped above this trend line channel. We've broken through what was apparently a wedge right there. And in the astrology, some pretty potent key dates are coming up. And I'll just, emphasize those right now. We on June 30th and July 1st, I've kind of represented that as one line here. Let's see how this plays out. I think we could go higher. Right now, this line right there is very important. If we go higher Monday and Tuesday, we'll probably continue going higher. As we move into July, like July 9th, middle of the month, the astrology is even stronger. And I want to also point out we're getting a repeat in this area of what happened in this area back here. And normally on the second go around of the cycle, it's even more of a prominent reaction in the market. So my bias here is this market's going to go higher in July. Silver, let me look at my notes. Silver is lagging gold in a little bit. But it too, the astrology gets stronger as we move into July. Keep in mind, silver and gold affect each other. Okay, even though we've got this big blank spot with our astro-dates, it's going to be affected by the gold market. But when we get into July 11th, 10th, 11th, which is here, and then into July 20th or so, increasingly this market is getting stronger, and I think it will also its strength will be reflected by what's happening in gold too. So Bitcoin, big, dry spell here with astrology dates. We hit sort of a date here, bounced off of some resistance, and we've just been trending down. We are at a point, though, this is, I think, Saturday morning's chart or Saturday evening's chart. We're at some support. We're below the 50. We're at some support. And what do we have coming up? Well, some fairly strong things are happening this week on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm leaning that this is going to be a bounce on Tuesday or Wednesday. And sort of like gold, as you get further into July, kind of in the later part of July, even beyond through here, it gets stronger. So, look at how long I've been talking about these astro dates were not the strongest, but they've been, we've been hitting some areas where we've had bounces and, reversals. We get stronger into July. So play the technicals, keep the astro dates in mind over the next month. Okay, Ethereum, same situation for the most part. We've been trading sideways. We're kind of resting on some support. Let me get to my notes. Remember what's going on. Kind of Wednesday and Thursday of this week, which is represented by this line, is a fairly strong, not super strong, a fairly strong energy, as is the middle of the month when we get into the 10th through the 15th. So like gold and silver, these two markets, in my opinion, Bitcoin and Ethereum, affect each other. And I think we'll see that happening here. I don't expect a big drop. I think we've kind of come down enough. If I would have drawn this out, which I didn't, that resistance level became support, and now we're kind of hitting it here for maybe the second time. So look for midweek bounce in Ethereum. So anyway, we got one more. US dollar. Actually, I've used proxies sometimes. This is UUP. Hopefully in the next week I'll start using the actual dollar index. For some reason, I use TradingView charting service, and I use the freebie service. And for a long time, I couldn't get the Dow Jones Industrials chart, so I had to use the ETF DIA. Same chart pattern and so forth, but the numbers weren't the same. I'm doing the same thing was true for the dollar chart. I couldn't get it through their free service. So I was forced to use an ETF. But now for some reason, I'm able to find these particular ones. So next week I'll have the real dollar chart here. But in any event, both the proxy and the US dollar, we've been riding this, bouncing off of this support level for some time. I think that's going to continue until, maybe later in the month. And there's a strong debate going on in the world about whether the dollar is, in the intermediate term is going up or down. I kind of see it at least staying up through July. We'll talk about this later and the reasons why, but this pod video is getting a little long. So anyway, that's it for today. And my name is Stephen. I've been researching financial astrology for 25 years. I have a master's degree in psychology, hard money, crypto advocate. If you have a question, this is my email. In a couple weeks, I'm going to have a website, which may be a faster way to get the, astro-dates that I've been citing. They'll be listed. Also, individual consultations online. You can access me through the site, and it'll go live in about 2 weeks. I do accept Bitcoin donations. So anyway, thank you for listening. Generally, I do this once a week. Every now and then I skip a week. If you really want to be on top of what I'm saying, stay current, consider subscribing and hit the like button. Please comment if you have a comment. And that's it for this week. Thanks for listening.